It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the quiet town of Ashton Falls, where everyone knew everyone and the humdrum of daily life rarely saw any interruptions. The streets were lined with trees that, even in the middle of spring, still bore the remnants of winter's chill. The local café, the Hearthstone, was filled with the usual crowd, regulars who gathered every day for their morning coffee, business owners gossiping over lunch, and, of course, the occasional tourist who happened to stumble upon the town's charm. Ava Bennett sat at a corner table, watching the world go by through the café window, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee. Her eyes were tired, a reflection of the sleepless nights she had spent worrying about her daughter, Sophie, and the struggles of her personal life. As a single mother, it was hard enough to balance a full-time teaching job with the demands of parenting, but recently, the weight of it all had started to feel heavier. Sophie, who had just turned 10, was becoming more independent, yet Ava couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The late-night study sessions, the increasingly distant attitude, the absence of that carefree childlike joy. It wasn't just the changes in Sophie that worried her, though. Ava had been grappling with a sense of isolation. The few friends she had left in town were busy with their own lives, leaving her feeling like she was stuck in an unending cycle of routine, devoid of any real connection. Then, as if on cue, the door to the café swung open, and Rachel Montgomery walked in. Ava's face lit up, momentarily forgetting her worries. Rachel was her best friend. They had been inseparable since high school, their friendship built on years of shared memories, late-night talks, and unwavering support. Where Ava was grounded and practical, Rachel was the embodiment of success, charismatic, confident, and always surrounded by a sense of adventure. Ava couldn't help but admire Rachel's life, the way she seemed to effortlessly glide through the world with a successful business, a beautiful home, and an enviable social circle. To Ava, Rachel was everything she aspired to be but never felt she could reach. "Hey, you!" Rachel greeted with a smile, slipping into the seat across from Ava. The café was bustling, but it felt like the two of them were the only people in the room. Rachel, dressed in a perfectly tailored blazer and expensive heels, exuded a kind of energy that immediately made Ava feel like everything was okay. "Hey," Ava replied, returning the smile, though her eyes betrayed a hint of exhaustion. She hadn't seen Rachel in a while, not like this. Their friendship had started to fade in recent months. Rachel had become busier with her career, and Ava had been consumed by the everyday struggles of raising Sophie alone. Still, despite the space between them, Ava always welcomed Rachel with open arms, knowing that Rachel was the kind of friend who, when present, made everything feel brighter. Rachel leaned back in her chair and studied Ava with a knowing look. "You look tired," she observed, her eyes scanning Ava's face. "Everything okay?" Ava shrugged, trying to downplay the mounting stress. "Just the usual," she said, offering a small smile. "Work, Sophie, life. You know how it is." She took a sip of her coffee, feeling the warmth spread through her body. "What about you? How's the business going?" Rachel's face shifted slightly, the smile fading just enough for Ava to catch a glimpse of something unfamiliar in her friend's eyes, something that felt like a moment of hesitation, quickly masked by the usual charm. "Oh, you know, busy as ever. But it's all good," she said, her voice cheerful but distant. "I actually came here to talk to you about something. It's been a while, hasn't it?" Ava nodded. She appreciated Rachel's effort to reconnect, even though something about Rachel's tone felt off. It wasn't like Rachel to be so formal, so guarded. Ava felt a pang of unease, but she quickly pushed it aside. There was no reason to worry. This was Rachel, her friend, her confidant. Rachel leaned in closer, lowering her voice as if the mere act of speaking the words would make the situation more intimate. "I've been meaning to talk to you about John," she said, her gaze flickering nervously around the room. Ava's heart skipped a beat at the mention of her ex-husband, John. The name itself carried so much weight, the good, the bad, and the complicated. John had been the love of her life once, the man she had married right out of college, the father of Sophie, and yet, over the years, he had become a shadow of the person she had once known. The divorce had been bitter, full of arguments and accusations, but Ava had always believed that they had remained amicable for Sophie's sake. John had been absent for most of Sophie's life, but Ava never thought he would become someone who could hurt her in a way that felt so deep, so personal. "What about John?" Ava asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She didn't know why, but suddenly the air between them felt thick with tension. Rachel hesitated before speaking again. "Look, I didn't know how to tell you this, but I've been seeing John for a while now." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the words hit Ava like a freight train. The shock washed over her, making her feel lightheaded. She could hardly process what she was hearing. Her best friend, her closest confidant, had been seeing her ex-husband behind her back. Ava's mind raced, her stomach churned, but all she could manage to do was stare at Rachel in disbelief. Rachel reached across the table, placing a hand on Ava's. "I never meant for it to happen, Ava. I swear, it just did. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Ava's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening as the weight of Rachel's confession settled in. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. She had trusted Rachel with everything, her secrets, her vulnerabilities, her pain. Rachel had been her rock, the one person who was always there to listen, to console, to offer advice. And now, Rachel had shattered that trust in the most unimaginable way. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ava felt a coldness creep into the pit of her stomach, and then, without warning, tears welled up in her eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back, but they spilled over anyway. The betrayal was too much, too overwhelming to process all at once. Rachel sat back, her face contorted with guilt. "I didn't know how to tell you, but I thought you should hear it from me. Please, don't hate me." Her words trailed off as Ava stood up abruptly, pushing her chair back so violently that it scraped against the floor. She needed to get away. She needed to breathe. "I can't believe this," Ava said, her voice shaking with disbelief and hurt. "I trusted you, Rachel. You were my best friend. How could you do this to me?" Rachel's face crumpled, and for the first time in years, Ava saw her friend as vulnerable, as broken, as she felt in that moment. But the hurt was too much for Ava to bear, and without another word, she turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Rachel sitting there, her hands trembling on the table. Ava's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a painful reminder of the betrayal she had just learned of. The life she had known, her friendships, her marriage, her trust, had just been torn apart in the blink of an eye. As she stepped into the cool evening air, the world around her seemed to blur. The town that once felt familiar, safe and comforting now felt alien, hostile. Ava's mind was spinning, her thoughts jumbled, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. Ava walked aimlessly through the quiet streets of Ashton Falls, her footsteps echoing against the pavement. Her mind was in chaos, a whirlpool of emotions she couldn't make sense of. The conversation with Rachel replayed in her mind, each word sinking deeper into her chest. Rachel, her best friend, had betrayed her in the most heart-wrenching way. She had been seeing John, the man who had once been the center of her world, her husband, her partner in everything, without her knowing. Ava's thoughts shifted to John, the man she had once loved with all her heart, the man who had left her for reasons she couldn't fully understand. It had been years since their divorce, but it had never felt like closure. The cracks in their relationship had become too wide to repair, and John had slipped away into another life. Ava had learned to accept that, but she never expected him to be involved with Rachel, of all people. The pain in her chest was suffocating, and it wasn't just the betrayal of her friend. It was the realization that something inside her had broken, that the people she had trusted most had shattered her sense of safety, her trust in others. The community of Ashton Falls had always been small and tight-knit, and the idea of someone from her inner circle, someone who had known her for years, betraying her in such a personal way was unfathomable. She had always prided herself on being the strong one, the one who could handle anything life threw at her. But this was something else entirely. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was a message from Sophie. "Mom, where are you?" The words were simple, but they hit her like a punch to the gut. Ava's heart twisted as she thought about her daughter, who had already been through so much. Sophie was at the age where she was starting to understand more about the world, the good and the bad, the complexities of life. Ava couldn't let her daughter see her like this. She couldn't let Sophie know just how broken she felt. Ava wiped the tears from her cheeks, trying to steady her breath before replying to Sophie. "I'm on my way home, sweetie. I'll be there soon." She forced a smile, though she knew Sophie couldn't see it through the phone. Still, it was important to her to keep up the facade, to shield Sophie from the hurt that was now tearing through her. When Ava arrived home, the house felt empty. The familiar smell of Sophie's crayons, the clutter of toys scattered on the floor, and the hum of the television in the background were all gone. Sophie had already gone to bed, and Ava was left alone with her thoughts. She went into the kitchen and opened the fridge, taking out a bottle of water, though she didn't really need it. Her hands trembled as she unscrewed the cap, the cold water slipping down her throat doing little to numb the aching void inside her. Ava's mind wandered back to Rachel. She had tried to put a brave face on when she left the cafe, but the emotions had overwhelmed her the moment she was alone. Rachel had been her everything, her confidant, her partner in crime, the person who had been there for her through all of life's ups and downs. They had shared dreams, secrets, and so many years of friendship that Ava had never once imagined this betrayal could happen. It wasn't just the affair with John. It was the way Rachel had done it, the way she had so casually crossed a line that Ava had never expected to be crossed. Ava had always been the one to offer advice, to listen, to hold space for Rachel when things got tough. But now, it felt like Rachel had turned the tables, and Ava had been left in the rubble of their shattered friendship. Ava grabbed her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen as she debated what to do. She had so many questions for Rachel, so many things she wanted to say, but she didn't know where to begin. The anger was rising inside her, but it was mingled with confusion, sadness, and betrayal. How had Rachel managed to keep this from her? How had she lied to her face for so long? Ava had always prided herself on being a good judge of character, but now she felt foolish. How could she have been so blind? She scrolled through her contacts and found Rachel's name. With a shaky breath, Ava typed out a message, "I need answers. We need to talk." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Ava's eyes stayed glued to her phone, waiting for Rachel's response, but the message remained unread. The silence was maddening. Ava had hoped Rachel would reply, would somehow explain herself, but as time passed, the emptiness in Ava's heart grew even deeper. The next morning, Ava forced herself out of bed. The weight of the previous day's events had not lessened. She went through the motions of getting Sophie ready for school, all while battling the storm raging inside her. Sophie, as usual, was excited for another day at school, but there was a quietness to her that Ava couldn't ignore. Sophie had been a little distant lately, and Ava wasn't sure how much of it was because of her own struggles or because of something else. She hadn't wanted to burden Sophie with her own issues, but now, Ava wondered if she was pushing her daughter away without realizing it. As Sophie ran out the door to catch the bus, Ava felt a brief moment of calm. She was alone, and for the first time since Rachel's confession, Ava allowed herself to breathe. She sat at the kitchen table, her mind swirling with a million thoughts. The betrayal. The confusion. The anger. But, amidst the chaos, one thought lingered above the rest. What was she going to do about it? Ava knew she had to confront Rachel. She couldn't let this hang over her, let it continue to fester. But how? How could she ever trust Rachel again? Could she even face her after what had happened? Rachel had crossed a line that could never be undone, and now Ava had to decide if their friendship was worth salvaging or if it was better to let it go. That afternoon, Ava found herself walking back to the hearthstone, the place where it all started, the place where Rachel had first confessed. As she stepped through the door, she saw Rachel sitting at a corner booth, her face drawn with worry. She hadn't expected Rachel to be here, but somehow, the confrontation seemed inevitable. Ava took a deep breath and walked toward the booth. When Rachel saw her, her eyes widened, and she quickly stood up. "Ava," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Ava didn't respond right away. Instead, she stood still, taking in Rachel's posture, her head lowered, her hands trembling. It wasn't the confident, poised Rachel she had known. This was a woman weighed down by guilt and regret. "You lied to me, Rachel," Ava said, her voice thick with emotion. "You betrayed me in the worst possible way. You betrayed our friendship." Rachel's eyes welled up with tears as she tried to speak, but Ava cut her off. "I don't want your apologies right now," Ava continued, the hurt pouring out of her. "I need to understand how you could do this. How could you hurt me like this? I trusted you with everything. How could you do this with John?" Rachel's voice quivered as she spoke. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to cross that line, but we were both going through things, and it just happened." Ava shook her head, disbelief etched across her face. "You don't get to say that. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just something that happened. You made a choice, Rachel. You made a choice to betray me." The silence between them hung heavy, both women struggling to find the right words. The weight of the situation was undeniable. Ava knew the truth, she had to make a choice too. Could she forgive Rachel? Could she ever look past the hurt, the betrayal, and the emotional wreckage that had been left in their wake? Or would this be the end of their friendship? The silence between Ava and Rachel hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Ava's chest was tight, her breath shallow, as she watched her once beloved friend crumble in front of her. Rachel's face was pale, streaked with tears, but Ava couldn't bring herself to feel sympathy for her. Not yet. Not when every word Rachel had said had deepened the wound inside her. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything that led up to it, the lies, the secrets, the years of pretending everything was fine when, in reality, it had all been falling apart. How could Rachel, of all people, betray her in such a profound way? Rachel's voice broke the silence again, quieter this time, almost pleading. "Ava, I never meant for any of this to happen. I've always been there for you, haven't I? I've been your friend through everything. You know how much you mean to me." Ava swallowed hard, her eyes never leaving Rachel's face. She had always prided herself on being able to trust the people closest to her, to see the best in them, even when things got tough. But now, she wasn't sure if she could ever trust anyone again. Not after this. "I trusted you, Rachel," Ava said, her voice low but firm. "I trusted you with my life. I trusted you with my pain. And you took all of that and threw it away. How could you? How could you look me in the eye all these years, knowing what you were doing behind my back?" Rachel flinched at the words, and Ava could see her trying to gather herself. The woman who had been her confidant, her rock, was now a mere shadow of herself, reduced to tears and shame. Rachel wiped her eyes, but Ava didn't look away. She needed to see this, needed to understand the depth of the betrayal. "I didn't know how to tell you," Rachel continued, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to explain it. John and I, we were both hurting. He was going through his own stuff after the divorce, and she broke off, shaking her head as if the words themselves were too painful to say. It just happened, Ava. It wasn't supposed to. It wasn't a plan. Ava's heart clenched. She wanted to feel pity for Rachel. She wanted to understand, to find some excuse that would make it easier to forgive. But she couldn't. She couldn't make sense of it. Rachel wasn't just some stranger, she was the woman who had held her hand through the hardest moments of her life. How could she betray that trust? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the situation hung between them like a looming storm, neither willing to make the first move. Ava's mind was racing, torn between the person she had known Rachel to be and the painful truth that Rachel had become someone entirely different. Someone unrecognizable. But no matter how much Ava tried to rationalize it, there was no denying the truth, Rachel had chosen John over her. And that was something Ava wasn't sure she could ever forgive. What happens now? Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure if she wanted an answer, but she needed to ask. Needed to know if there was any chance, any tiny shred of hope, that their friendship could survive this. Rachel's shoulders slumped, as though the weight of the question had finally broken her. I don't know, Ava, she said softly. I don't know if there's any coming back from this. I don't know if I can fix what I've broken. Ava felt her chest tighten as she processed Rachel's words. The thought of losing her friend, of losing the person who had been her partner in everything, was almost too much to bear. But deep down, Ava knew the truth. The bond they had shared was fragile, built on trust that had been shattered beyond repair. And though it hurt more than anything she had ever felt, Ava knew she couldn't keep holding on to a friendship that no longer existed. She had to let it go. I don't know either, Ava replied, her voice a mixture of sorrow and resolution. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I don't know if I can forgive you for what you've done. I thought I knew you, Rachel. But now, I don't know who you are anymore. The words hung between them, a finality that Ava hadn't expected to feel so soon. She had imagined yelling, fighting, demanding answers. But instead, she was left with a hollow sense of grief, the weight of what had been lost heavier than any anger she could muster. Rachel nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving Ava's face. I understand, she whispered. I would understand if you never wanted to see me again. I've destroyed everything. Ava's heart twisted as she watched Rachel break down completely. She had never seen her like this, Rachel, the strong, self-assured woman who had always been the life of every room, reduced to a shell of herself. It was almost too painful to watch, and for a moment, Ava wondered if she could find it in her heart to forgive her. But forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting. And Ava wasn't sure if she could forget. Rachel had taken something irreplaceable from her, the trust that had bound their friendship together. And in return, she had left Ava with nothing but the remnants of a shattered past. Ava stood up slowly, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. The weight of the moment was crushing. She didn't know what the future would hold for her and Rachel, but she knew this was the end of something. Whether it was the end of their friendship or the beginning of a painful road to reconciliation, Ava didn't know. She just knew she couldn't stay in that moment any longer. I need time, Ava said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to sound composed. I need time to think. I need to figure out what this all means for me. For us. Rachel didn't respond, her face a mask of grief as she sat in the booth, her shoulders hunched in defeat. Ava turned and walked out of the cafe without another word, the cold air hitting her like a slap to the face. The world felt different now, as though everything she had known had been thrown into chaos. She had always been the one to keep things together, to hold on to hope even in the darkest moments. But now, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. As Ava walked through the streets of Ashton Falls, the weight of her decision settled over her. She knew she had made the right choice by walking away, but it didn't make it any easier. Her heart ached with the loss of a friendship she had once thought was unbreakable. But sometimes, Ava realized, the most painful decisions were the ones that led to growth. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but she knew she had to find herself again. She had to rebuild, to redefine who she was without the weight of Rachel's betrayal hanging over her. And as she continued walking, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Sophie. "How are you, Mom? Love you." Ava smiled through her tears, feeling a warmth in her chest. Maybe she had lost Rachel, but she still had Sophie. She still had a reason to keep going. She wasn't alone. And that, Ava realized, was all she really needed to rebuild her life. Ava spent the next few days in a haze, trying to process everything that had unfolded. The memories of the cafe conversation with Rachel replayed over and over in her mind, but with each passing hour, she felt a growing sense of numbness. Rachel's tear-streaked face, her desperate attempts to justify her actions, seemed like a distant echo now, and Ava wasn't sure if she was relieved or horrified by the detachment she felt. Everything had changed so quickly, and Ava wasn't sure who she was anymore. Was she the woman who had stood by her best friend for years, unwavering and loyal? Or was she now someone who had learned the hard way that even the closest relationships had their limits? The silence in her apartment was almost deafening. Ava spent most of her time in her small, cozy living room, curled up in an armchair with a book she never seemed to finish reading. Her phone sat unused on the coffee table, the text messages and missed calls from Rachel piling up. Each time her phone buzzed, a knot of anger and confusion tightened in Ava's chest. She knew she had to face Rachel eventually, but the thought of seeing her, hearing her voice again, made her stomach churn. Ava's thoughts drifted to the time they had spent together, years of friendship that had felt unshakable. How had things gone so wrong? How had Rachel's betrayal crept into their lives so quietly that Ava had never seen it coming? She had always considered herself a good judge of character, someone who could read between the lines and sense when something wasn't right. But Rachel had been her best friend, her closest confidant, and yet she had pulled off the greatest deception of Ava's life. The truth was, Ava had ignored the subtle signs over the years, the late-night calls Rachel had taken when Ava wasn't around, the strange look on her face whenever Ava mentioned John. She had dismissed it all, chalking it up to her own insecurities or overthinking. And now, that naivety was coming back to haunt her. Rachel had betrayed her in the worst way possible, and the truth of it stung deeper than anything Ava had ever experienced. She had never imagined that the person she trusted most could hurt her in such a profound and unforgivable manner. How could someone she had shared her darkest secrets with, laughed with, cried with, someone who knew everything about her, betray her so coldly? Rachel hadn't just slept with John, she had crossed a line that Ava couldn't even comprehend. She had destroyed the very foundation of their friendship. Ava spent most of her days in solitude, only leaving her apartment when absolutely necessary. The thought of facing people, of pretending everything was fine, felt impossible. She couldn't go to work, couldn't pretend to be the same Ava she had been before Rachel's betrayal. Every interaction with others felt like a performance, a mask she put on just to get through the day. Even her daughter, Sophie, noticed the change in her. Sophie had been the one constant source of comfort for Ava in the past few days. Her texts, always filled with love and encouragement, were the only things that kept Ava from sinking deeper into the void. One evening, as Ava sat on her couch, staring out at the darkening skyline, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Sophie. Ava answered it almost immediately, needing the connection, the warmth of her daughter's voice. "Mom, I'm really worried about you," Sophie's voice came through, soft and concerned. "You've been so quiet lately. You haven't even told me what happened with Rachel. I know it's been hard, but I just want to know you're okay." Ava inhaled deeply, trying to steady the overwhelming emotions that were bubbling up. She hadn't talked to Sophie about the details yet. She hadn't been able to bring herself to recount the entire painful truth. Sophie was her anchor, and the last thing Ava wanted was to burden her with the weight of her shattered friendship. But she knew she couldn't keep shutting her daughter out. "I'll be okay, Soph," Ava said, her voice steady but strained. "I just need some time, you know. Everything's a bit complicated right now." Sophie didn't seem convinced. "You don't have to go through this alone, Mom. You know that, right? You've always been there for me, and I'll always be here for you." Ava closed her eyes, the tears that she had been holding back threatening to spill over. She had always been the one to support Sophie, to lift her up when she was struggling. And now, in her time of need, Sophie was doing the same for her. It was a bittersweet realization for Ava. It reminded her that even when everything seemed lost, there were still people who cared for her, people who would stand by her no matter what. But it also made her feel incredibly small. She had always prided herself on being the strong one, the one who could take on anything life threw at her. But this betrayal was too much, too raw. She didn't know how to heal from it. "Thanks, sweetheart," Ava whispered. "I'll be okay. I just need some time to think." After ending the call with Sophie, Ava sat in silence for a while, her thoughts swirling. She knew deep down that she couldn't stay in this state forever. She couldn't let Rachel's betrayal define her life. But the path forward seemed so unclear. Was there a way back to the life she had known before? Was it possible to forgive Rachel, to rebuild the friendship they had lost? Ava wasn't sure. She didn't know what forgiveness would even look like in this situation. She had always believed in second chances, in the possibility of healing, but this felt different. This was not a simple mistake, it was a betrayal of the deepest kind. As days passed, Ava's mind continued to race. She tried to focus on her work, but her heart wasn't in it. She avoided social media, too afraid to see pictures of Rachel, too terrified of seeing how easily Rachel had moved on with her life. Ava couldn't bring herself to reach out to Rachel, couldn't bring herself to hear any more of her apologies. What would it change? What could Rachel possibly say to make Ava trust her again? Then, a message arrived. This time, it wasn't from Rachel. It was from John. Ava stared at the screen for a long time before even daring to open it. What could he possibly have to say? After everything that had happened, why would he want to talk to her? The message was short, almost too brief to make sense of. "I'm sorry, Ava. I never meant for any of this to happen." Ava's heart pounded in her chest as she read the words over and over again. John had been part of the betrayal, part of the destruction of everything Ava had held dear. But now, he was reaching out, apologizing for his actions. She wasn't sure how she felt about it. Part of her wanted to lash out, to tell him exactly what she thought of him. But the other part of her, the part that still longed for closure, wondered if she could find some semblance of peace through his apology. She didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but she also didn't know if she could ever truly heal without it. For the first time in days, Ava took a deep breath and started typing a response. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an invitation to mend what had been broken. It was just a message, an acknowledgement that she had heard him, that she had received his words. Ava typed slowly, her fingers trembling as she crafted the response. "It's too late for apologies, John. You and Rachel have changed everything." As soon as she sent the message, Ava felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the closure she had hoped for, but it was a step toward something. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control again. She had taken the first step toward healing. Ava spent the next few weeks in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The raw anger she had initially felt began to ebb, replaced by a deep sadness and the overwhelming sense of loss. She found herself constantly questioning what could have been done differently, wondering if there was something she had missed along the way that might have prevented this betrayal. She had loved Rachel like a sister, shared her secrets, and built her life around their bond. The idea that Rachel, the one person who had always promised to have her back, could so easily turn her life upside down felt like an unbearable weight on her chest. One quiet morning, as Ava sat in her kitchen sipping coffee, she stared blankly out the window at the gray sky. Her mind was a storm of thoughts and memories, but there was one that kept resurfacing, the image of Rachel and John, laughing together, standing close, sharing moments that had once been meant for Ava alone. That image had haunted her day and night, but now, as the weeks passed, Ava realized something. The pain of the betrayal wasn't just about Rachel and John. It was about her own sense of self, about the way she had allowed herself to be so utterly blindsided by people she trusted. As she thought about it more, Ava couldn't help but feel ashamed. How had she let herself be so blinded by the perfect image of friendship, the belief that she had everything under control? She'd always prided herself on being independent, on being the strong one, the one who never needed anyone else. But in that moment, she realized just how wrong she had been. She had given too much of herself away, trusted too freely, and in doing so, she had lost sight of her own needs, her own boundaries. Ava knew she couldn't keep going like this, caught in a cycle of anger, sadness, and self-doubt. She needed to confront her pain head-on, to figure out what came next. But what exactly could she do? The thought of confronting Rachel, of having any kind of closure with her, made Ava feel sick. She wasn't ready for that. But she couldn't go on like this, trapped in this state of limbo. She had to take back control, had to rebuild her life on her own terms. But where to begin? What was the first step to mending a broken heart that seemed beyond repair? One evening, as Ava was lying in bed, trying to sleep but failing, she received another message. This time, it was from Sophie. Her daughter had been incredibly supportive throughout all of this, but Ava knew Sophie had to be worried about her. The message was simple: "Mom, I'm coming home this weekend. Let's talk. Please." Ava stared at the message, the words bringing both comfort and a wave of guilt. Sophie had always been the voice of reason, the one who helped her see beyond the pain. But what could Ava say to her? What could she possibly explain about the mess she was in? Rachel had always been more than a friend to her, she had been a sister. And John, well, John had been a constant presence in her life for years. Now, both were strangers in a way, their betrayal reshaping her understanding of everything she thought she knew about trust. The following weekend, Sophie arrived at Ava's apartment with a suitcase and a big smile, her eyes full of concern. The moment she stepped inside, Ava's heart twisted. She had always tried to be the strong one for Sophie, to be the guiding force in her life. But now, looking at her daughter's face, Ava realized how much she had lost, how much she had failed to protect Sophie from the fallout of her own mistakes. Sophie had witnessed the unraveling of Ava's world, and now, Ava had to face the truth: it wasn't just Rachel who had betrayed her, it was herself. After a long hug, Sophie sat down beside her mother on the couch, her hand gently resting on Ava's. "Mom," Sophie began softly, "you've been through a lot. I can see that. But I want you to know that you don't have to carry this all by yourself. I'm here for you." Ava swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wasn't sure if she could talk about it yet, wasn't sure if she could explain the depth of the hurt that was eating away at her. But Sophie was right. She didn't have to go through this alone. Maybe, just maybe, she could start healing by opening up, by allowing herself to be vulnerable, even if it terrified her. "I don't know where to begin, Soph," Ava admitted, her voice trembling. "I feel so lost. So betrayed. And I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again." Sophie squeezed her mother's hand, offering what little comfort she could. "It's okay, Mom. I understand. But you will heal. You will get through this. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but you'll get there. Over the next few days, Sophie and Ava talked. Slowly, tentatively, Ava began to open up. She told Sophie everything, the moments she'd shared with Rachel, the way she'd ignored the small signs that something was wrong, the hurt she'd felt when she found out about the affair. Sophie listened intently, offering no judgment, only support. For the first time in a long while, Ava felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. It wasn't the same as having Rachel there, but it was a start. As the days went by, Ava found herself thinking more and more about the future. She couldn't stay trapped in the past, couldn't let Rachel's betrayal define her forever. But she also knew she couldn't just move on without addressing the pain, without finding a way to make sense of what had happened. The thought of confronting Rachel still filled Ava with dread, but she also knew that it was the next step in reclaiming her life, in rebuilding the trust she had lost, not just with Rachel but with herself. But even more than that, Ava realized she had to do something she had never allowed herself to do before. She had to forgive herself. She had spent so long blaming herself for not seeing the signs, for not doing something sooner, for not protecting herself from the people she loved. But she couldn't keep carrying that guilt. She couldn't keep punishing herself for something that wasn't her fault. She had loved, she had trusted, and she had given all that she had. And though it had been taken from her, Ava still had the power to choose how she moved forward. It wasn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt, it was about taking back control, about finding the strength to let go of the past and embrace the future. Ava made the decision to reach out to Rachel. It wasn't for reconciliation, not yet. It wasn't for closure, either. It was for herself. It was the first step toward healing, toward finding peace with the choices she had made and the path she had to walk alone. She sat down at her desk, her fingers trembling as she typed the message. Rachel, I don't know if we can ever fix what's broken between us. But I need you to know that I'm moving on. I can't keep holding on to the past. I'm letting go. She hit send before she could think twice. And with that, something inside Ava shifted. It wasn't the end of her journey, but it was the beginning of something new. She was finally taking back her power, and in doing so, she was starting to heal. As the weeks passed, Ava began to feel the stirrings of change. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but each day felt like a small step forward. She started to rebuild her life, one piece at a time. She spent more time focusing on her own needs, reconnecting with old friends, and rediscovering passions she had long neglected. The pain of betrayal was still there, lingering in the background, but she no longer allowed it to dictate her every move. She was slowly, but surely, learning how to live for herself again. Her first major step was deciding to take a short trip on her own. She had always loved the idea of traveling solo but had never given herself the chance to do it. After the betrayal, she realized that she needed to break free from the confines of her old life and create new memories, ones that weren't clouded by the past. She booked a weekend getaway to a quiet coastal town, a place she had always dreamed of visiting but had never found the time for. She packed her bag with only the essentials, determined to leave behind the emotional baggage, even if just for a little while. When Ava arrived at the coastal town, the crisp sea air immediately calmed her racing thoughts. The waves crashing against the rocks and the distant cry of seagulls seemed to wash away the weight she had carried for so long. She spent the first evening walking along the beach, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace, as if the world had slowed down just for her. It was a reminder that there was still beauty in the world, that there were still moments worth experiencing. Over the next few days, Ava allowed herself to simply exist. She wandered through art galleries, explored local shops, and even indulged in a solo dinner at a quaint seafood restaurant. At first, she felt the pang of loneliness, but as the days wore on, that loneliness began to feel less like a void and more like a companion. It wasn't a sadness that gripped her anymore, it was a quiet acknowledgement that she was healing, piece by piece. She was learning how to be content with her own company, something she had never fully appreciated before. On her last day in the town, Ava sat by the water, her feet buried in the sand as she reflected on everything that had happened. The pain of Rachel's betrayal was still there, but it no longer felt like an insurmountable mountain. It had become a part of her story, a chapter she would always remember, but not one that would define the rest of her life. She had been through the storm, and now she was beginning to find her way to calmer waters. It was then that Ava received a message from Rachel. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the notification on her phone. She had not heard from Rachel since she sent that final text message, the one where she had told her that she was moving on. Ava's first instinct was to ignore the message, to not even bother reading it. But something inside her urged her to open it. She had already let go of the anger, had already decided that she would not let Rachel control her emotions any longer. So, with a deep breath, she tapped the screen. "I'm sorry, Ava," the message began. "I know there's nothing I can say to make up for what I did, but I wanted you to know that I regret everything. I've lost you, and I don't know how to fix that. I miss our friendship more than I can say." Ava stared at the message, feeling a mix of emotions flood through her. There was the pain of what had happened, the hurt that still lingered deep inside her, but there was also something else, something she couldn't quite put into words. Was it relief? Was it closure? Maybe it was both. She didn't know. She just knew that she wasn't ready to open that door again. She had spent so long trying to protect herself from the heartache that came with trusting Rachel, and she wasn't ready to risk it again. She had learned her lesson, hard as it was. Instead of responding immediately, Ava took a moment to think about what she really wanted. She had spent so much of her life living for others, whether it was Rachel, John, or anyone else in her circle, but now, for the first time in a long while, she was learning how to live for herself. She wasn't going to let the past pull her back in. She was determined to continue moving forward, even if that meant leaving Rachel and the hurt she had caused behind. With a steady hand, Ava typed her response. "I appreciate your apology, Rachel. But I think it's time for us both to move on. I need to let go of the past in order to heal. I wish you the best." After hitting send, Ava felt a strange sense of peace. She had made the right decision for herself. She didn't need to hold on to the anger, but she also didn't need to welcome Rachel back into her life. She had learned that her worth wasn't defined by anyone else's actions, and she didn't need anyone's validation to feel complete. The days that followed were filled with small victories, moments of growth that Ava had not expected. She started reconnecting with old friends, people she had neglected in the past, and in doing so, she began to rediscover the joy of meaningful relationships. She began to understand that not every friendship or connection had to be perfect to be valuable. The bonds she forged moving forward would be built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding, not on the fragile illusion of perfection. But even more importantly, Ava learned to trust herself again. She realized that, despite everything that had happened, she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. The woman who had once been devastated by betrayal was now standing tall, ready to face whatever came next. She had learned the hard way that life wasn't always fair, that people would disappoint her, and that not every story would have a happy ending. But she also knew that she had the power to choose how she responded to life's challenges. She could let them break her, or she could rise above them. As the weeks turned into months, Ava's life slowly transformed. She had found a sense of peace within herself, and the pain of the betrayal began to fade into the background, no longer a daily weight on her shoulders. She started to look at her life with new eyes, appreciating the moments of joy, the relationships that truly mattered, and the lessons she had learned along the way. And while Ava would never forget what Rachel had done to her, she had come to terms with it. She had accepted the betrayal as part of her journey, a part of the tapestry of experiences that had shaped her. But it no longer defined her. She was free from it. Free to move forward. Free to live her life on her own terms. Ava's journey had been long and painful, but in the end, it had brought her closer to herself. And for that, she would always be grateful.